Hi, I'm Teresa Coenen with Stitchin Tree Quilts. Welcome to our From Marty and Me Club. This month we'll be working with Martys Pattern, Twinkling Star. It uses set A and C of Marty's templates. The finished sampler quilt that we have here is just 30 inches. Won't you join us? First of all, let's take a look at Martys Pattern. Martys Pattern Twinkling Star uses sets A and set C. On the front cover is the design which she calls the Orange and Purple Dazzler, and that's the design that we did for our store sample and our demonstration. Inside the front cover, as always, there's always a color photo of an additional quilt that can be made using Martys Pattern. And then some information on page 3 about how she came up with her pattern and her design. Pages 4 and 5 talk about the templates. It's standard language in Martys Patterns. It describes the templates that are included in the two that we'll be using for this quilt. Also on page 5, Marty describes her perfect patchwork system number 1 and 2. Two great books for using sets A, B, C, and D. On pages 6 and 7, Marty goes through and describes how to cut using her templates and the importance of using a 1/4 inch seam. Pages 8 and 9 begin with the construction technique for using the Twinkling Star. One place to note is right here on page 8 that piece number 17 must be cut with the fabric face up. This is that small triangle piece here, and that's very important. If you don't cut that with the fabric face up, you're going to end up with some of your pinwheels going one direction and some of your pinwheels going another direction. On page 9, please take note of how piece number 17 overlaps piece 16 and it is not square on the bottom. I'll show you in our demonstration later why that's important. Pages 10 and 11 continue with construction techniques. It's all very straightforward and there's no changes. Page 11 shows how to fan the seam on the back of the pinwheel when pressing. Page 12 and 13 begin the pattern for making the Midnight Stars, which was the quilt on the inside cover of the pattern book. That's not the one that we're using for our store sample. And page 14 and 15 begin the Orange and Purple Dazzler, which is the quilt on the front cover of the pattern, and that's the one we used for the store sample. Now on page 14, under the fabric requirements, where it says 16 orange prints, and that's for that inner pinwheel, you'll need 1/4 yard or 2 strips. The 1/2 yard for the 64 A2 triangles is 4 strips. The assorted medium purples for the C16 triangles is 4 strips, which is also a 1/2 yard. The rest of the yardage is correct for Martys Pattern. Pages 16 and 17 are another variation of how to use the Twinkling Star pattern along with a focus fabric. How to make a pillowcase is on page 18 and 19. Page 20 shows how to use the Twinkling Star for a border for a panel quilt. Page 22 shows us how to use the Twinkling Star to make a dorm size quilt. And page 24 begins the templates. Once again, Martys Pattern is chock full of additional projects that can be done using the same template set. Let's get started on our quilt. For our store sample, we chose fabric from the line called One for You and One for Me by Pat Sloan of Moda. You'll note that we chose to put a very light fabric in where Marty had a dark purple, and we chose to put a taupe with dot where Marty had assorted purples. In Martys Pattern on the front cover, she shows pinks and oranges for this small pinwheel. We chose 2 different colors, a lime green and a turquoise green. But what's most significant is if you take a look, we see 2 separate pinwheel patterns. Of course, the one that we're supposed to be focusing on, the small pinwheel, but then also the secondary pinwheel, the one with the taupe. That secondary pinwheel pops out on our sample quilt simply because of the contrast between the light and the dark. One should pay attention to those lights and darks because of the contrast and the secondary pinwheel design. To construct this twinkling star, we'll be using two different template sets from the Marti Michell template series. We'll be using set A and set C. We'll only be using one template from set A, A2, and we'll be using two templates from set C, C16 and C17. Let's begin by cutting our A2 blocks. First, you're going to want to square up your fabric so you have a nice straight edge. Once you've done that, you can use the A2 block in order to determine the width of your strip, or to make things easier, I use the A1 block, which is the same width as the A2 block. It gives me a straight edge on both sides and makes it a little easier to straighten up that edge. You will need 4 strips of the A2 unit in order to complete your 64 blocks that you need for Twinkling Star. Cut your 4 strips, layer 2 strips on top of each other. Remove the selvage and begin cutting your A2 units. You'll make the A2 units by placing your triangle directly on your squared edge that you just created. Start with your rotary cutter, pull back, and then move forward. Set the block unit aside in order to trim off the engineered corners later. Flip the A2 unit over, match the straight edge and the straight edge here, make another cut, set the block aside. When I trim the engineered corners, I like to place the pieces on a retired cutting mat, the back side of an old cutting mat. That way then I can go ahead and rock my template and not worry about any gouges that I would make in the cutting mat. I do all of the pieces in one direction and then turn the mat and do the other pieces the other direction. Now we're ready to cut the C16 triangles. Again, we begin with a nice straight edge of our fabric. And then we'll use the C16 template to determine the width of our strip. It's a little trickier to size with the C16 template since we only have this small point at the top to match up with our ruler. Again, we'll need 4 strips for C16. Place 2 strips of the C16 fabric on top of each other. Remove the selvage from the left-hand side and then place your C16 triangle directly on the fabric, matching the straight edge here that you just cut off from the selvage, the straight edge at the top, and the straight edge at the bottom. Again, you'll make that cut starting part way up in your template and bring your cutter back. Remove this and we'll trim that corner later. Flip your template over and continue cutting your triangles until you have 64 units. Use your C16 template to engineer your corners. Again, I like to use the back of an old cutting mat. cut all of your triangles one direction, then turn your mat and cut your triangles the other direction.